Okay, so in this video, we're going to start setting up our development environment, putting together the tools that we need to use Ruby on Rails. Now, in the old days, well, even sort of today, it was very, very hard to set up Ruby on Rails. Even today, when I set it up on my own, it can take a half hour to an hour, and if I'm not paying attention, I almost always screw something up and have to start over or fix something. It's just a nightmare, it really is, and it really turns a lot of people off to Ruby on Rails. And it doesn't have to be this hard. So before we get started, let me just say, normally when you set up Ruby on Rails, you're either going to be setting it up on a Windows machine, a Mac, or a Linux machine. Now, setting up Ruby on Rails on Windows is a nightmare, and if you're on a Windows machine, I do not recommend you ever do it. Now, you can run a Linux virtual machine and run Ruby on Rails in Linux, and that's what I suggest you do if you're on a Windows. Mac and Linux, it's a lot easier to set up and get going because those are both built on Unix, and Rails uses the Unix command line terminal for everything. But we're not going to be doing any of those things. We're not going to set it up on a Mac, we're not going to set it up on Windows, we're not going to set it up on Linux. Instead, we're going to use a virtual cloud environment, which means we'll log into the cloud, we'll have our development environment set up there. Everything will be set up for us. We won't have to install Rails. We won't have to install Ruby. We won't have to install any of the dependencies that drive you crazy. It's all just up and running. And these are a relatively new thing. In the old days, you used to have to set all this up on your computer, but now you can just log into the cloud. Now, there are a bunch of different cloud development providers, I guess you would call them. And really all of them, any of them will work. We're going to be using something called Cloud9, and that's at c9.io. There's a couple other ones I might mention later, but this one I really like. It's very easy. It's completely free as long as you're just like a single user. Now, if you have like teams of people all building an app together, I think you might have to pay for it or something, but just for individuals, for individual use, it's absolutely free. So this is great. So head on over to c9.io and click the sign up button. And they'll just ask for your email address and a username and a password. So set all that up. They'll send you an email, confirm the email, and then come back here and sign in. Type in your username or your email address, your password. It's loading our dashboard. Currently on the free plan. If you want to upgrade, it's $19 a month, and this is what you get. So you can just ignore that. And this is the dashboard, right? So right now we have one demo project. I'll just go ahead and delete that. So this is basically the setup. So we're going to go over here and click Create New Workspace. And then name it. And let's name it, since we're going to be building a clone of Pinterest, I'm going to name it Pinterested. And then click Ruby on Rails. That's what we're going to be using. You'll see this Rails tutorial. That's something else. We don't really need to know anything about that. What we want is the Rails. Click Create. And now basically what this is doing is it's spinning up a virtual Linux server, I guess, and setting up the environment, all that good stuff. And boom, right now, it usually takes within about a minute usually, or less, to create these things. So here it is, it's created. Now we can click this, first click on it, and then click on Start Editing. Close the dashboard. And here's the screen you'll see at the beginning. Got this README thing. You can delete that. This welcome screen, we can delete that. And so here it is. This is our virtual environment. And these are all the files that come with Rails, and it could be overwhelming, but I'm going to dive into that in just a second. This is the command line down here, the command prompt. And on a Linux machine or a Mac, this is going to be called a terminal, and those computers come with a terminal. You can search for them on your computer, but we've got it right here. Right here is where we'll open and edit files. You can see, if you click on one of these things, boom, it pops right up. We can edit it, save it, close it. So this is it. This is the environment. So let's dive in and look at all of the different pieces here. Now, this can be a little bit overwhelming, I realize, but it's not too bad. Let's start out with the command line. If you're not familiar with a Unix type command line, this is going to be weird for you. It sort of reminds you of like a DOS prompt on an old Windows computer, and it's kind of like that, but not really. You don't need to know a whole lot about the command line, the terminal, in order to use this. I'm going to show you the different commands that you can use. basically, there's a few commands you're going to need to know. And let's start out with the pwd. Now that shows what directory you're in, and we're in home Ubuntu workspace. And I should note this is an Ubuntu Linux environment that we're running here. pwd shows you what directory you're in. ls shows you what files are in that directory. If you type in ls-a, it kind of makes it look a little nicer. ls-la, you get a list that goes up and down like that. So clear the screen, ls-a. Let's look at these files real quick. We have the gem file, readme, bin, config, app, log, test, vendor. So these files here are these files here. So we see this app directory, and we see, where's it at? Right here, right? We see the bin, config, gem file. So basically that's all this is. This is the terminal display of these files. So for the most part, we're not going to have to deal with any of this stuff. We'll just click here and it opens. But if you needed to, you can dive in that way as well. So basically we're going to be using the terminal to run commands that we need to run from time to time, and it'll be more apparent as we get started. But that's the command line. You can change directory by using the cd command and then typing in the directory. Say we wanted to go into the app directory. Cd app ls-a. These are the files in the app directory. And if we click on the app directory, you'll see assets, controllers, helpers, etc., etc. To go backwards, cd ... and you see now we're back in the workspace directory, which this is the workspace directory, right? So not to overwhelm you with the different commands we're going to be needing, we'll get into that all later, but just to sort of be familiar, this is the command line. This is, some people call it the terminal. That's that. Next, we want to look at this whole area here. Now this is overwhelms a lot of people because there's just a ton of stuff here and it all seems crazy. But to sort of run this down, let's look at Rails as a whole. Now Rails is what is called, it uses something called the MVC architecture. And MVC stands for Model View Control. Let me just pull up a web browser, type in MVC, and we can go to Wikipedia here real quick, get an image. So this is the Model View Controller. This is sort of the architecture that Rails uses, and a lot of frameworks use this sort of architecture. So what does all this mean? Well, the model is basically the database, right? A lot of websites use databases, very important. So when you hear model, think database. The view is just the website, the thing that people see when they go to the website, what they view, right? And the controller is basically the thing that handles the interactions between the view and the model, right? So if you've got a website and when somebody goes to that website, it interacts with the database and pulls up some information and views it on the page. Well, the controller is the sort of the thing that goes behind the scenes and makes all that happen, right? So this is really great for Ruby on Rails because databases are just nasty to work with. I've been doing this, I've been programming computers since I was about 7 years old. I've done just about everything there is to do, but to this day, databases still give me a headache. I can use them, I know how to use them, but whenever I do use them, I've always got to go look it up. I've got to remember, okay, now how does this work? Something always goes wrong, I have to fix it. It's just a pain in the ass, right? Well, Rails takes care of all that for you. The controller handles all that stuff for you behind the scenes. So that allows you to just throw up your website, work on how it looks in the view section, let the controller handle all the nasty database interaction for you, and it just makes everything fantastically easy. So basically we're split into 3 areas here, right? Well, if you come back here and look, basically these directories and files sort of match up to those 3 areas. So you have the database, which is the model, right? You have the config, which we'll get into later. And then you have the apps section. You have the views, more models, and your controllers. And some of these other things we'll get into a little bit, but that's basically how it breaks down, those three areas. And once you sort of start to understand those three areas, all of this becomes sort of easier to navigate. You go, oh, I need to fix something on the web page. Well, you click on apps, you go to views, layouts. There's nothing there now, but there will be very soon. And you know where to go. Oh, I need to fix something in the controller. Boom, you just go to the controller. So there's a lot of stuff here, and it seems overwhelming, but it's not that bad once we get into it, and it'll become a lot more clear as we go along. The other thing, the fourth area of all of this, is this gem file section right here. Now, the gem file, one of the great things about Rails is that it allows you to create very intricate websites very easily. And one of the ways you do that is by using these things called gems. And think of them as little packages that do stuff, right? For instance, we're going to be using something called Bootstrap. It's a CSS framework that allows us to make our website look really, really cool very easily. So we will install the Bootstrap gem. And that just means typing in gem, the name of the gem, saving this file, running a command down here, which we'll do later, and boom, it's up and running, and you can use it, and you just drop it right into your project. So that's the power of Rails. There's just thousands of these gems that do just about anything you could think of. So if there's something you want to do in your web app and you don't want to have to write all the code yourself, you just find a gem that does it for you. You slap it in, boom, that's it. So that's one of the really powerful things about Rails, and that's where we're going to be doing this here. Now you can look up gems, and we will in a little bit, at rubygems.org. That's sort of the main repository website that handles all the gems. But before we get started in doing anything, let's clean up this file. Now you see these little number signs here, these little tic-tac-toe signs. That's a comment, right? That's sort of a standard comment thing. And it's good to comment stuff as you go along, because you might check back 6 months from now and need to tinker with something, and you might forget what the code does. So you read the comment tells you what the code does, and you're good to go. This is especially good if you're working with teams and other people on your team need to know what your code does. They can read the comment. So generally speaking, it's very, very important to comment all of your code, and we'll be doing that as we go along. But in this gem file, these comments are sort of just in the way, so we're going to delete them. So just sort of clean this up, because we know what all these do. We will after you use this a little bit. These are just the standard gems that get installed when you start up Rails. So I'll just go ahead and delete all these. Now to save this file, I'm going to hit Control S, or I guess it's Command S on the Mac, and you see all changes have been saved. That's the gem file. Now we're using this online development environment, and you might not be. You might be running it on your computer. So normally, to start a new project, you would type in Rails new Pinterested. That's our name, right? And then this command will generate all of this stuff. Make sure you're in your workspace directory, whatever directory you want to install all of these things, right? Now we don't have to do that because it's already been done for us when we set up this project, but you would if you were doing it without an online development. And also, you want to make sure that you're running the most up-to-date versions of Rails and Ruby. To make sure that you are, you can type in the command Rails-V. You can see we are running Rails 4.16. Now I think there's a higher version. Go to rubygems.org. Type in Rails. I think there's a 4.18 at the moment. So yeah, see right now Rails is at 4.18. And we're on 4.16. That's no big deal. That's fine, as long as it's close to where the current version is. Also, we can find Ruby-V. It says we're on Ruby 2.14 version 265. That seems like it's about up to date too. If you're on a Mac or on a Linux, or heaven forbid on Windows, you'll probably have to update these when you first get started, because you're going to have an older version, a very, very older version. So good luck with that. There's all kinds of tutorials you can find online that walk you through it. It's a nightmare. It's going to take you an hour and a half. But there you go. That's why we are using this development environment. We don't have to worry about any of this, but I just sort of wanted to show you a couple of those commands that you can use to determine what versions you're running. So now I could go through here and talk about these in more detail, but I think instead we're just going to start building our project, and as we go along you'll start to become more familiar with all of this stuff. It seems a little overwhelming at first. Just roll with it, and it'll start to become clearer as we get going. So that's all for this video. In the next video we're going to start to talk about version control.